Charlie, Charles Spencer Chaplin, says he was born in South London's East Street, known locally as East Lane, on April the 16th, 1889, though no birth certificate has ever been found. Films like Easy Street might seem remote from the television programs watched by children today, but they too know Charlie Chaplin from American television's Sesame Street, where Maria does her impression of him regularly. There's still an East Lane market today in South London near the Elephant and Castle. Charlie Chaplin is its most famous son, one of the indelible symbols of the 20th century.
Right, Charlie, you're back home again, eh? Where you was born?
Charlie's mother, Hannah, was a South Londoner who started working in the music halls after she married his father, also Charles, in 1885. Charles took to the boards a year later than Hannah, but was more successful. This was the heyday of the English music hall, with variety acts like this, and star performers like Dan Leno and Mari Lloyd. Kennington in Lambeth, South London, was one of music hall's main centres. Many of its poorer performers lived there, and the pubs in the Kennington Road were the centre of its social life.
In everyday life, many marvels around, fill us with a feeling of wonder profound. Often the heart aches with tears dim the eye, as sad scenes in passing through life we espy. Haunting the public house daily away, begging tobacco and cursing his fate. Work unto him is a thing quite unknown. Body and soul, he's a drunkard alone.
Charlie's father knew success in the 1890s, and with it came the smart house on a Kennington Square. But with success also came the breakup of Charles and Hannah's marriage. Charles left Charlie and his elder half-brother Sidney to be supported by their mother. She couldn't find work, and they declined into poverty. The vicious poverty of Victorian London, with its dirt and degradation, was a condition for which the rich were inclined to blame the poor themselves. They moved from lodgings to lodgings around Kennington, in the Kennington Road, Methley Street, Pownall Terrace, just to mention a few. Charlie prevented this 1925 film biography from being shown publicly. The Central London Poor Law School, Hanwell, where Charlie was committed once for as long as 18 months. He was also sent to the Norwood School in South London. Someone else who knew the school as a boy recalls what life was like there.
You can't really understand the horrors of London life as it was then. Hunger was part of our life, and to be fed, clothed, and looked after was a real luxury, and we appreciated it.
The ultimate indignity for a Victorian was the workhouse, and Charlie, Sidney and Hannah more than once knew the inside of this one, the Lambeth workhouse. Hannah was committed as a lunatic to an asylum on the southern outskirts of London. She never recovered from a series of traumas, her failure in the music halls and resulting destitution, her own mother's insanity, and the abduction of her third child by his father, who was also a music hall performer. The first time Hannah was committed, in 1898, was the moment when Charlie entered show business in a clog dancing act, the 8 Lancashire Lads. This man, William Jackson, the manager of the act, gave Charlie his first break and training in the skills of music hall. Echoing the words of his own song, Charlie's father died of drink and was buried in Lambeth Cemetery, Tooting. He was laid to rest in an unmarked pauper's grave near the much more ornate tombs of other music hall stars. Meanwhile, Charlie left music hall temporarily for the legitimate theatre. He spent 2.5 years touring as Billy the Page Boy in Sherlock Holmes. Casey's Court Circus, a music hall burlesque troupe, was his next job. He was one of its stars. In 1908, he joined one of the pantomime companies run by Fred Carno, in his day Britain's greatest comedy showman. Charlie's half-brother Sidney was already working for the firm. Carno, pictured here, sent Charlie on 2 tours to America. During the second in 1912, Charlie was signed up by Mack Sennett's Keystone Movie Company. In America, Charlie drew on a Carno sketch, The Mumming Birds, for this film. Here's Charlie's first screen appearance as the Tramp, causing chaos for a film crew. It's a typical Keystone idea, born of the chaos-producing factory at Sennett's studio. Charlie made 34 one- and two-reel films for Keystone in 1914 on a salary of $150 a week. He didn't always play the Tramp. This was his first film appearance, where he plays a dude out to seduce. And here's Charlie with no costume and no makeup, coming out worst in an encounter with Keystone star Ford Sterling. Or so it seems. Charlie played this surprising role in 1915 when he had moved to the S&A Company for 8 times the salary that Sennett had paid him. But the Tramp became Charlie's enduring creation. His popularity knew no bounds. He appealed to the ordinary movie-going millions and the middle-class snobs who affected to despise them. The irrepressible Tramp conquered the world. This contract with a mutual company in 1916 gave Charlie $10,000 a week, plus a bonus of $150,000. The short comedies he made for Mutual were undoubtedly his finest. Charlie was at the top of the industry. He wrote, directed and starred in his own films. Only Keaton perhaps ever matched that, but Keaton, unlike Chaplin, never became his own producer. He became good friends with Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. Fairbanks was perhaps the only close male friend he ever had. Charlie, Doug and Mary were Hollywood's royal family, whose every move was chronicled in the press and by the cameras. But while Charlie clowned, Europe was plunged into war. He was criticized for not fighting, but his films were crucial morale boosters. He and Sid also helped to raise funds.
When the moon shines bright on Charlie Chaplin, his boots are cracking for want of blacking, and his little baggy trousers, they want mending before we send him to the Dardanelles.
The war was certainly good for Hollywood. America did not join in until 1917, and by then American films had taken over the world market in the absence of European competition. And Charlie's films were on the crest of the Hollywood wave. The world clamored for them. In 1918, Charlie built his own studio in Hollywood. It still stands today. He was then working for the First National Company on a contract that gave him almost $1 million a year and more time to take care over the making of each film. The Keystone days of cranking out as many pictures as possible were over. Films became longer and more lavish. Charlie was not tempted to make epic spectacles like D.W. Griffith, though he used as much film to shoot The Immigrant as Griffith did for The Birth of a Nation, which was 6 times as long. Charlie just let the cameras roll as he improvised with this trusted team of colleagues.
What I am interested in is emotion, is feeling. To sit down, deliberately, with any plan, I can't. Yeah. I'm entirely dependent on my emotion, and I don't care how it comes or what the motive is behind it. you've solved the logic of a situation, its feasibility, and its reality, and the possibility of it being able to happen, things will fly at you. Ideas fly at you. I've always felt.
In these modern times, even the best manager needs help to succeed. For when pressure builds, it becomes harder to keep things rolling without losing control and falling behind. A manager could use the IBM personal computer for smoother scheduling and greater productivity. It can help a manager become a big wheel in the company. The IBM personal computer at a store near you.
In reality, the Tramp was associated more with havoc than efficiency. Though not personally ostentatious, Charlie settled into the enviable life of the Californian super-rich. Japanese servants, sumptuous houses, dreams of grandiose projects, and frolics at the homes of the rich and famous. Here he is at the legendary San Simeon estate of American newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst. Charlie's first marriage was to 16-year-old Mildred Harris. After 2 years, they were enmeshed in a divorce in which Mildred and her lawyers tried to seize Charlie's considerable assets. It was a costly affair. But business was booming. In 1919, he set up United Artists with Griffith, Fairbanks and Pickford. The lunatics are taking over the asylum, as one wit put it. He had made his first feature film at the same time, The Kid with Jackie Coogan. The Kid mixed the comic and the sentimental, and clearly drew upon Charlie's own childhood memories of Lambeth. In 1921, Charlie came home again to London. He also visited Paris, where he received a government award. Such was his popularity that he was mobbed everywhere he went. By 1925, the visit had already become mythical. Charlie had more than his fair share of imitators. Some were preposterous. Billy West was the most accurate observer of the Tramp's every move. He even pinched the lampshade gag. Cinemas were fond of using Chaplin look-alike competitions as promotional gimmicks. The Philippines boasted Canuplin, a professional. The tradition continues today. After all these imitations, it's little wonder that he chose to make his first film for United Artists without starring in it. It was the masterful and highly influential Woman of Paris. Charlie Chaplin was now a celebrity amongst celebrities.
I had one or two ideas. I said, it's on the gold rush, you'll find gold. So what? And what happens then? And to make a comedy out of it. But I couldn't motivate the story. Oh, I had an agonizing time trying to motivate the story. One thing suggesting another. Till we got into a simple situation. Hunger.
One of Chaplin's biographers called his book The Great God Pan. There was undoubtedly more than one reason for this. Charlie had a reputation as a womanizer, which seems to have been justified, but were the gossip columnists right in all of these cases? He did marry Lita Gray, who at the age of 12 had appeared in The Kid. When they married, she was 16. They had 2 children. It was another stormy marriage, and the biggest divorce settlement in American history at that time.
Mr. and Mrs. Charles Chaplin were granted a divorce today in an interlocutory decree after both their original complaints had been withdrawn. Mrs. Chaplin will receive a $600,000 settlement, custody of the children, and a $200,000 trust fund for them. It is also rumored Mrs. Chaplin's attorneys are receiving $200,000.
Charlie had brought his mother to America in 1921. Her mental state was such that she never understood her son's fame. She died in 1928, and her grave is an eloquent contrast to that of Charlie's father. Charlie was then preparing City Lights, which marked his transition to sound cinema, or rather the beginning of his resistance to it, as he felt the talkies undermined pantomime and the international appeal of films. Raj Kapoor, one of the greatest Indian comic actors and filmmakers, acknowledged his debt to the Tramp, though Kapoor talked and, of course, sang.
मेरा जूता है जापानी ये पतलून इंग्लिस्तानी सर पे लाल टोपी रूसी फिर भी दिल है हिंदुस्तानी मेरा जूता है जापानी ये पतलून इंग्लिस्तानी सर पे लाल टोपी रूसी फिर भी दिल है हिंदुस्तानी मेरा जूता है जापानी
After the release of City Lights, Charlie made a round-the-world trip, lasting over a year. He revisited London, received the Légion d'honneur in Paris, was mobbed here in Berlin, and came to the attention of a Dr. Freud in Vienna. His trip and his growing interest in the world economic crisis stimulated Charlie into producing one of his greatest feature films and the final appearance of the Tramp. Modern Times is for many the definitive film about industrial society. It owes much to René Clair's À nous la liberté, but Clair prevented his producers from suing for plagiarism, saying, "I am happy and proud if I, whom he has so much influenced, was able for once to influence him." The Tramp departed, arm in arm with Paulette Goddard.
Charlie Chaplin and his leading lady, Paulette Goddard. Everywhere they go, they're dogged by reporters trying to find out if they're married. But true to form, Charlie won't talk. On the other hand, if you're any good at the latest guessing craze, perhaps you can work it out from this. But in case you can't, he says it while dancing, and even now we don't know.
Well, they were married in the Far East in 1936 and divorced in 1942. In between came The Great Dictator, an idea prefigured in a song by the British comic Tommy Handley.
Who is this man who looks like Charlie Chaplin? What makes him think that he can win a war? It can't be the moustache. That only makes us laugh. And Charlie's done it better, and before. If it wasn't for the boots and cane and trousers, you couldn't tell the two of them apart. But the whole idea's absurd. Charlie's never said a word. An adult couldn't play a silent part.
In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, "The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Charlie readily acknowledged that fascism turned out to be no laughing matter. In March 1943, he made a live transatlantic broadcast to bombed-out Lambeth.
Although I left London 35 years ago, I shall always remember the top room at 3 Pound Hall Terrace, where I lived as a boy. I shall always remember climbing up and down those 3 flights of narrow stairs to empty those troublesome slops, and Healy's, the greengrocers in Chester Street, where one could purchase 14 pounds of coal and a penn'orth of potherbs, and Waghorn's, the butcher's, where one could buy a pound of tuppenny-end pieces, and Ash's, the tea grocer's, where one bought a pennyworth of mixed stale cake with all its pleasant and dubious surprises. Now they tell me that Pound Hall Terrace is blasted by the German Blitz. I remember the Lambeth streets, the New Cut, the Lambeth Walk, Vauxhall Road. They were hard streets, and one wouldn't say they were paved with gold. Nevertheless, the people who live there are made of pretty good metal. Although you have suffered, the future will be brighter. For out of the ruins of Lambeth, out of the dust of all your bombed cities, will rise a New England, where poverty will be inexcusable and charity offensive to the dignity of a people who have, by their blood and tears, won the right to be profitably employed and to live decently in a more enlightened and progressive world. God bless you, Lambeth.
A few months before the broadcast, a young actress had broken into Chaplin's Hollywood house with a gun. The Joan Barry case began. In June 1943, she accused Chaplin of being the father of her unborn child, a charge she was encouraged to make by Hollywood gossip columnist Hedda Hopper, with a little help from the FBI. While the Joan Barry charge was headline news, Chaplin married Una O'Neill, daughter of playwright Eugene O'Neill. She was just 18. The marriage transformed Charlie's personal life. Early in 1944, Chaplin was indicted on criminal charges in the Barry case, under a 1910 Act designed to control prostitution. Even though he was acquitted, the persecution of Chaplin had begun. The Barry paternity suit continued on, however. The first jury could not agree on a verdict. In spite of blood tests, which proved that Chaplin was not Carol Ann Barry's father, the second jury decided in April 1945 that he was, and Charlie was made to pay.
Open your eyes.
Madame is wanted on the telephone.
You know better than to interrupt me.
Paramount is calling.
Who?
Paramount Studios.
Now do you believe me? I told you DeMille would jump at it.
It is not Mr. DeMille in person. It is someone by the name of Gordon Cole. He says it's very important.
Certainly it's important. It's important enough for Mr. DeMille to call me personally. The very idea of having some assistant call me, say I'm busy, and hang up.
Very good, madame.
Charlie and Mary Pickford were the only two who remained of the original partners in United Artists. Mary secretly recorded all her phone calls, so this exchange about Charlie's controversial film Monsieur Verdoux survived.
Oh, I thought the reception was wonderful of the picture.
Well, yes, for that kind, you know, that's a tough. Those intellectuals, they're pretty tough.
I know it.
You know, and, but nevertheless, I thought, there's a lot of laughs there, you know.
Oh, yes. Well, that was the toughest possible audience.
And then it's that kind of a picture. It's a sensational thing that people would go, you know, some of the comments were quite good. People want to see it. It's a repeater.
Oh, of course.
People want to see it again. They want
well, it has several depths, you know. I mean, it's several levels.
Exactly.
And that's why it will bear seeing many times.
Yes. You know.
Tell me, when are you going to New York, Charlie?
Off he went to the most hostile press conference of his career.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the press. I'm not going to waste your time. I shall say proceed with the butchery.
Could you define your present political beliefs, sir?
I have no political persuasions whatsoever. I've never belonged to any political party in my life, and I have never voted in my life.
Could you answer the direct question, are you a communist?
I am not a communist.
A communist sympathizer with the question.
A communist sympathizer, that has to be qualified again. I don't know what you mean by a communist sympathizer. I say this, that during the war, I sympathized very much with Russia because I believe that she was holding the front. And for that, I have a memory, and I feel that I owe her thanks. In that sense, I am sympathetic.
Mr. Chaplin, do you share Monsieur Verdoux's conviction that our contemporary civilization is making mass murders of us?
Yes.
Charlie's politics had interested the FBI and its precursors ever since he had allegedly given $1,000 to the American Communist Party in 1922, before communism was the ultimate in crimes. Even then, J. Edgar Hoover was in charge.
I am today demanding that Attorney General Tom Clark institute proceedings to deport Charlie Chaplin. He has refused to become an American citizen. His very life in Hollywood is detrimental to the moral fabric of America. In that way, he can be kept off the American screen, and his loathsome pictures can be kept from before the eyes of the American youth.
Congressman Richard M. Nixon of Los Angeles hit out today at Charles Chaplin when he learned that Chaplin would attend the world...
Richard Nixon took a personal interest in the case. The young congressman, a protege of Senator Joe McCarthy, wrote to Hedda Hopper in support of her campaign against Chaplin in May of 1952, "I agree with you that the way the Chaplin case has been handled has been a disgrace for years."
Back to Britain in the liner Queen Elizabeth comes Charlie Chaplin after an absence of 21 years. And what a great reception greets him and his family from the thousands who have gathered to welcome him home. Chaplin's last London visit
In September 1952, while he was in the middle of the Atlantic, Chaplin's re-entry permit to the United States was rescinded.
But it was the ordinary folk of Britain who really took him to their hearts. The people he loved and knew, because he was one of them and understood them.
As the late Calvin Coolidge said when he terminated his presidency, he was embarking to go home, and waylaid by one of the pressmen who said, "Mr. President, won't you say a few farewell words to the American people?" He said, "Yes, goodbye."
Limelight, his last film for United Artists, about a music hall performer at the end of his career, was released soon after Charlie was banned from returning to America.
I was never ambitious. I never wanted to make a lot of money. I just wanted to get away with a sense of, to get away from my very poor environment. That's all, that's all. Now, success is to get away from this imprisonment, this poverty. That's all.
Charlie bought this house, the Manoir de Bon, in Vevey, Switzerland in 1953 as his place of exile. It was his final home. He continued to be feted, but this time with a communist-inspired International Peace Prize. He gave the money to the poor of Paris and of Lambeth. He made A King in New York independently in London, the film of a free man, as the Italian director Roberto Rossellini called it. In the late 50s, he revisited the places of his youth with a home movie camera. Chaplin published his autobiography in 1964. He posed for this still with Una and 6 of their 8 children. Not bad for a child hater. Hollywood began its reconciliation with Charlie by replacing his name in its Walk of Fame in 1972. It had been removed in 1958. Then came a special award at the Oscar ceremonies, Charlie's emotional return to the America that had thrown him out. The recognition was long overdue. Charlie celebrated his 85th birthday in 1974.
What do you think of life in general, and what do you think of death?
Well, death comes to us very reluctantly, and life is marvelous. It's a wonderful thing. But as you get on, you always think of moments past. You always think of death.
What did you say to the Queen, Sir Charles?
I was dumbfounded. I couldn't talk.
What are your immediate plans for the future now, Sir Charles?
Well, I'll make one more picture. I always say that.
His next project was to star his daughter Victoria as a winged creature, but The Freak was never made. Sir Charles Chaplin died on Christmas Day, 1977. After the funeral, his coffin was stolen in a quite macabre incident by a Pole and a Bulgarian who wanted ransom money to start their own garage. The plan misfired, and they were caught. In Cuba, in 1967, mobile units were bringing the cinema to isolated rural communities. At this screening, more than 100 people saw a film for the first time in their lives.
Anne-Marie, she begin a body. Anne-Marie, she begin a body. She come in at the dance, she no no feel like rain unless she pon a little stiff for the good sense. And dance with the DJ where they call Charlie. No mention the one where they call him Josie. Me say, Anne Marie, she begin a body, right? Anne Marie, she begin a body. Say every time she see me, she started to sing here and now. Cha la 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 la. Happy birthday, Charlie Chaplin. Say cha la 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 la. Happy birthday, Charlie Chaplin. But me nah go marry that dead girl.